It is now my pleasure to introduce Senator David Leyonhjelm. He has been a senator for the state of New South Wales since July 2014. He has a degree in veterinary science from the University of Melbourne and Bachelor of Laws and Master of Business Administration from Macquarie University. Senator Leyonhjelm has worked as a veterinarian, as a marketing manager, industry development manager, and then as an agribusiness consultant, where he was the founding director of Barron Strategic Services. He was first elected to the Senate at the 2013 election and was re-elected at the 2016 election. His topic is Western Australia and Secession. Senator.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, important people, unimportant people, and everybody else. It's nice to be here. I would like to acknowledge the spirits of our ancestors, Jack Daniels, Johnny Walker, Chivas Regal. How's that one? John Stone, okay? I need to be serious for a moment. In 1900, Western Australia was a hesitant participant in federalism, in federation. It had only been granted self-government in 1890, and many in Perth were not that keen on handing over some of their powers to a new federal government after such a short period of relative autonomy. And only threats from the eastern-leaning goldfields to form a separate colony if federation was not pursued prompted the powers in Perth to belatedly agree to a state referendum on Western Australia joining the federation. Now, the referendum to join the federation passed with more than two-thirds of votes in favour. There were complaints that this strong vote was boosted by pro-federation voters recently arrived in the goldfields from the eastern states. Nonetheless, it was seen as final. Sir John Forrest, the then Premier of Western Australia, said at the time, "The Commonwealth is not only for today or for tomorrow, but for forever. It is indissoluble. We are going to bind ourselves to join and never separate again, unless, of course, we are separated by an Act of the Imperial Parliament. That would be the only thing an Act of the Imperial Parliament could sever us as it unites us." And yet, just 6 years later, a resolution for a secession referendum was passed by the WA Legislative Assembly. The then Premier Moore ignored it. In 1933, Western Australians sang, "Westralia shall be free," and voted in a state referendum on secession. Two-thirds of Western Australians voted in favour of secession. However, this message was blurred by the fact that on the same day, West Australians voted out the pro-secession Liberal government and voted in the anti-secession Labor Party. The incoming Labor government nonetheless said it would pursue secession, faced with either seeking a federal referendum or petitioning the British Parliament to re-establish WA as a colony. The Labor government chose the latter. The British Parliament declined to act on the petition. So that's where it stayed. Since 1933, talk of WA secession has waxed and waned. In 1974, the discussion was enlivened by Lang Hancock, who founded the Westralian secession movement. This had about 3,000 supporters at its peak, but a string of prosperous years saw its numbers dwindle, and it was dissolved in 2011. Now, as we've heard, complaints about the distribution of the GST by the Commonwealth Grants Commission, ironically, a body established in part to soothe WA's concerns after the 1933 referendum, are now leading some to suggest that perhaps its time has finally come. Let me declare my position. I am all in favour of WA seceding, for reasons which I shall explain. I don't pretend to be an authority on political philosophy or of political history, but I am somewhat of a fan of Thomas Jefferson and his thinking in relation to governments and power. In his view and mine, governments are inherently dangerous. They are always looking for ways to increase their power at the expense of the people, and it is incumbent on the people to be constantly on their guard against that. There are many famous quotes attributed to Jefferson, but one I particularly like is this: "I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical." He also said this: The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Now, I can think of a few tyrants who could shed some blood without causing me to shed any tears. And I have no objection to a bit of rebellion. But it would make sense to avoid the need for that in the first place. And Jefferson had some ideas about that too. He believed power should be shared, divided, and devolved to the people and groups who are most affected by its application. Jefferson supported the right to secession. He wrote to James Madison in 1799, arguing that if the principles of the Federal Compact are not respected, then it would be proper to sever ourselves from that union we so much value, rather than give up the rights of self-government which we have reserved, and in which alone we see liberty, safety, and happiness. Jefferson continued to hold that view in 1816, when he wrote a letter in which he set out his concept of ward republics, or small units of local government. He proposed to divide the counties into wards of such size as that every citizen can attend when called on and act in person, will relieve the county administration of nearly all its business, will have it better done, and by making every citizen an acting member of the government and the officers nearest and most interesting to him, will attach him by his strongest feelings to the independence of his country and its republican constitution. He suggested these mini-republics would manage their own schools and select their own jurors. They would be the smallest, most intimate parts of political life and the basis for state republics and the national republic. And perhaps most important of all, they would act as a restraint on the judicial as well as the legislative and executive branches of government. As we all know too well, Jefferson's plan did not materialise. In fact, the opposite occurred. Large central government grew so as to prompt the American Civil War, which, unlike what Hollywood would tell you, was not merely a conflict between the good North and the evil South over slavery. One of the consequences of the victory of the North was that large central government became well entrenched in America. The same centralising creep of the executive, legislature and judiciary followed Australia's federation too, such that large central government is now entrenched here too. In financial terms, our state governments can now do little more than beg for funds from the federal government in order to implement policies the federal government has coerced them to implement. Outside that, they impose red tape and nanny-state rules that make us less free and treat us like children or dangerous idiots. Jefferson's concerns are no less legitimate today than 200 years ago. Government centralisation presents a threat to rights and liberty, discourages civic virtue and encourages dependency. Secession offers an opportunity to rectify that by empowering government at the lowest level. The recently retired Liberal MLC Norman Moore, who I am delighted to know to learn is here today in the audience, was a strong supporter of secession. He believed this is about states having meaningful authority. I agree, that is one good reason to support it, but we shouldn't think of it as merely replacing a big government in Canberra with a big government in Perth. Secession should embrace the principle of subsidiarity. In other words, devolving the exercise of power to the lowest possible level. So what might a free and independent Western Australia look like? Well, for a start, you wouldn't need to argue about your GST entitlement. Instead of 34% of your equal per capita share, you'd get all of it. In fact, because the typical West Australian pays more GST than the typical Easterner, you would get more than 100% of your equal per capita share of GST, assuming, of course, you still thought a GST was warranted. An independent WA could levy its own personal income and company taxes. This presents an opportunity to set yourself up as a low tax zone, dropping income and company taxes to, say, a flat 15% and imposing royalties on mining, petroleum and the gas industries as you see fit. If you embraced Jefferson's concept of mini-republics, you could devolve some taxing powers to regional councils. That might lead to a special low tax zone in the north, for example, as a means of encouraging development there. International capital would flood in, and many major international firms would be likely to base their operations here. An independent WA would sensibly have free trade and unrestricted capital movement, and could avoid regulatory barriers to trade by recognising licences obtained and standards met in other jurisdictions. However, an independent WA would need its own immigration system. This offers a unique opportunity to learn from the experience of our national system and to ensure immigration genuinely benefits the economy. It might mean unrestricted movement for citizens and permanent residents of Eastern Australia, provided the WA government didn't come to a view that Canberra is granting such residency and citizenship irresponsibly. It might mean welcoming skilled migrants from other parts of the world, while perhaps charging a substantial fee for family reunions. And of course, ensuring West Australian citizenship is only granted to those who assimilate and share its values. An independent WA would need its own currency and shouldn't have a common currency with the hopelessly incompetent eastern states, such as South Australia and Tasmania. The lesson of the euro looms large here. The WA economy, with its reliance on minerals and energy, would inevitably be subject to significant economic cycles. A fluctuating currency is one of the best ways of ironing out the effects of this. Defence could be handled by joining ANZUS and signing a defence cooperation treaty with Eastern Australia. On the industrial relations front, WA could abandon all centralised wage fixation in favour of individual employment contracts and the abolition of the minimum wage, just as Scandinavian countries do. This would almost certainly see unemployment fall dramatically, while employment growth would draw labour away from the eastern states. In healthcare, Secession would provide the opportunity to abandon the socialised medicine model of Medicare, to be replaced with a policy based on individual responsibility. One way of achieving this, as shown by Singapore, is health savings accounts. This would work in a similar fashion to the current superannuation savings accounts, being tax exempt, with those having savings below a certain amount obliged to use the funds to take out health insurance. Even those on welfare could have insurance, with their premiums drawn from their welfare benefits. Imagine a drug addict on welfare being told his insurance premium will fall if he cleans up, meaning he'll have more of his welfare left over. And more broadly on welfare, WA could have a system that provided a safety net for the genuinely disadvantaged, but included incentives for people to look to their own resources before calling on others for assistance. There are many ways of achieving this. One that I like is tax-free savings accounts to be used to fund loss of income insurance, or at least be available as a first port of call in the event of unemployment. Abolition of the minimum wage would ensure many disabled could obtain jobs that paid more than the disability support pension. This would mean they had the dignity of work and a higher income, while saving their fellow West Australians the cost of paying them to do nothing. Age pensions could return to what they were originally intended to be, a last resort for those who were unable to save enough for their retirement during their working years. They could be strictly means tested, taking into account both assets and income, so that nobody received a pension that was paid for by someone who was poorer than they are. And of course, all the insane restrictions on saving for retirement now in our national superannuation policy could be abolished. Things like caps on contributions and total funds. WA could decide for itself how far it wants government to go in preventing discrimination in the private sector. Discrimination by private individuals is a natural part of everyday life, but our governments have chosen to outlaw certain types of discrimination. An independent WA would have the option of leaving the Racial Discrimination Act, Sex Discrimination Act, and the Commissars of the Human Rights Commission to the luckless eastern states. An independent WA could also decide whether to entrench rights and freedoms against encroachments by future governments. While devolving power to WA is good in principle, it tells us nothing about how an independent WA government would exercise that power. One option might be to adopt the original US Constitution, plus the first dozen or so amendments. Another is to have its own constitution, in which it enshrined freedom of the press, free speech, freedom of worship, equality before the law, and the right to bear arms, giving meaning to what Jefferson said in relation to rebellion as the constitutional birthright of its citizens. A government that fears the people rather than vice versa is far more likely to respect liberty. I don't for a moment expect all those things would occur if WA were to secede, nor do I consider them all essential. But even if it did some of them, I believe a free and independent Western Australia would quickly become the Singapore of the South Seas, with prosperity and a standard of living that would quickly leave the East behind. WA could become an international mecca for corporate investment and hard-working, ambitious migrants from throughout the globe. And if it did, I might even move here myself. But it could also secede and do things quite differently. It could impose income taxes that take a third or more of the income of average wage earners and tax companies at a rate higher than most other countries. It could impose barriers to imports and subsidise failing industries to protect jobs. It could even build its own submarines, frigates and destroyers in order to create jobs in marginal electorates. It could make it difficult for skilled migrants to come while facilitating family reunions and humanitarian arrivals. It could introduce its own centralised wage fixing system with a minimum wage of over $18 an hour plus mandatory penalty rates for weekends. It could adopt its own socialised health system with no incentive for health service providers to compete or be more efficient, or for the public to keep itself healthy. It could introduce welfare, including unemployment and disability schemes that offer little incentive to work. It could pay benefits like childcare subsidies that take almost no account of income. It could provide free stuff like public hospitals and public schools that anyone can use, irrespective of means. It could have an age pension scheme which took no account of the wealth of the recipient. It could impose discrimination laws that prohibit individuals from discriminating on the basis of gender, sexual preference, race, age and so on, so that if same-sex marriage is legalised, those who disagree with it could be taken to court. And it could rely on international treaties and the grace and favour of judges to protect fundamental human rights. But if that was all secession offered, why would you bother? You've already got that now. Increasing WA's share of GST wouldn't make that much difference. If you want to secede, go ahead. But if you do it, for God's sake, do it properly.